right. As we continue working through the life of Christ, we come now to the raising of Lazarus. And so a lot of times as we come in, we've got slides and references from a variety of different places. Today, as we look at Lazarus, we're basically locked into one passage, one chapter. So if you want to go ahead and turn over to John chapter 11, that's where we will be today. As we look at this, there are a lot of rabbit trails that we could get off on. And to be honest, there are a lot of rabbit trails that I would like to get off on. And we will mention a couple of those as we go, kind of like you see the road sign as you drive down the highway. You might see the sign, you might make note of it, but that doesn't mean you're getting off there. So we will try to not get off at the wrong exit today. But there's a lot of interesting, there's a lot of interesting points within the lesson, and then there's a lot of interesting points in the scenery that we're going by. If you remember, way far back when we started this series of lessons from Answers in Genesis, we're in 157, so we're talking, 150 lessons ago. I described this. This is kind of like an overview. It's a flyby. If I'm flying, my preference is to sit in the window seat so I can look down and see what scenery I can see. And at times, if I'm flying over cities, I've been to this city, so I'm trying to look for landmarks that I might be familiar with. This is a flyby. There are a lot of things we're going through, and you might say, boy, I hope he talks about, and we don't even mention it because we're covering everything so quickly. But that doesn't mean that you can't take that time and dive in and dissect it and go into the detail and do some study on those things. The statement at the bottom of the slide today, Jesus proves his power over death by resurrecting Lazarus. Even with just that one statement, there's so much there. We go back to Genesis. Who is it that created all things? Who is it that made Adam and made all these animals, made Adam, made Eve and breathed into her and gave her the breath of, what was that next word? Who is it that gives life to mankind? And in this lesson here, we look at Lazarus. Lazarus is given life a second time. And so, again, there's a lot of interesting thing here that we could look at. We'll see if everything works the way it's supposed to today. Okay, I mentioned last week, if you remember, I had slides, and then I had an old version of the slides that came for some reason. We're going to have a quick survey, okay? The three different colors. Is one color easier to see than the others? Okay, which one's the easiest to see? Top, middle, or bottom? Top? Okay. Okay. If you remember, we've been playing and trying to fight the dimming of the projectors a little bit, and so it was playing with colors, trying to find one that's the easiest to read. I will work with either the top or the bottom then. The bottom's a dark blue. Top, you've got the red. The green is similar to what we used to use, and that one will go the way of all men then. We'll just kind of move that one out of the way. Our key verse for the second half of this unit from Matthew. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come unto me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake, notice the inclusion of that phrase within that part of the verse, whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. There's a lot there, and we referenced this. We actually spent some time within this verse and the passage that the verse is found in when we were talking about discipleship and the true cost of discipleship. It's not simply, Jesus doesn't simply want us to be saved, although obviously he does. It's saved and discipled. And then as we're discipled, he wants us to be doing what? To be making disciples, to be teaching and training others. And so there's a cost to it. We talked about this, I think it was even last week, that as Jesus was teaching this, he talks about the the one who's building a tower and doesn't plan and prepare for it and runs out of money before he's done. He talks about the king that's going out to battle and has to decide, do I go to battle or do I sue for peace and not lose my entire army? And there's a cost to discipleship. And even in this verse, take up a cross. There are lots of things we could take up. Notice what he mentions. He mentions something that will cost you your very life. And so when it comes to discipleship, if we're a true disciple, then everything that we have is expendable. We're focused completely and entirely upon Jesus Christ. He is the goal and the desire of our heart. Some introductory notes, just some things as we dive into the lesson today. First of all, only the true living God can raise the dead. We look back in Moses, Aaron, in the book of Exodus as they're standing before Pharaoh. Go to Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. In both instances, you had wise men who were able to mimic some of the miracles that these men did. Or who were able to, in the case of Daniel, well, they could tell the dreams. Well, they could tell the dreams as long as you didn't know what the dream was. But when you told them, when they knew what the dream was, but if you told them, oh, you got to tell me the dream too, they're stuck. In the case of Pharaoh's magicians, they were able to mimic some of the miracles that Moses did, and then as things got a little bit more challenging, they had to bow out. Well, when it comes to raising the dead, they're not even in the audience. Only God can do that. This one here is more of a, throughout the course of history, including modern day, many of the stories of raising the dead are nothing more than stories. And we've seen that, again, lots of rabbit trails. And here's rabbit trail number one. We see lots of stories about people saying, boy, I died and went to heaven, and here I saw and found, and then we find that maybe that didn't quite happen the way it was stated. Only God can raise the dead. Usually the stories that we hear are really good stories. Jesus is omniscient. As we're reading through this and looking at the lesson today with Jesus raising Lazarus, at what point did any of this that was happening catch him by surprise? I mean, think about that for a moment. And we'll see that even as we dive into the first slide here, that there's nothing here that catches him unawares. And at what point did he lose sight of the end of the story? Well, he knew what the end of the story was. He knew that Lazarus was dying. He knew that Lazarus had died. He knew that Lazarus had been dead, and he knew that Lazarus was going to live again. And he knew all of that at the beginning, middle, and end of the story. And it's important that we remember and understand that. As we study this, remember that death is the result of sin. We go back into the book of Genesis in the very beginning. We'll go to the next note here. Death was not God's plan. Man sinned, and death is the result of sin. And so, as we read through this, make sure that we understand, yes, death is the normal course of man today. It is appointed unto men once to die. However, that's not what God planned on. It wasn't God's plan for man to sin, but God knew that man would sin because God is omniscient. And so just some notes as we get started here. John chapter 11 is where we should be. And we'll jump right into the first verse here. As norm, we'll not read every verse. Time is the enemy of class anyhow. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he, that we just got done saying, is omniscient. He said, this sickness is not unto death. Well, wait a minute. I can read, and I know what happens here, but he knew the end of the story. But it's interesting here. For the glory of God, that the Son of Man might be glorified thereby. Now think back, just a couple lessons. Jesus heals the blind man, the man who was born blind. Remember the disciples. First thought in their mind, Lord, who hath sinned, this man or his parents? And what was Jesus' response? Neither. He is blind so that the Father can be glorified. And here we have a very similar statement. Lazarus, we know he's going to die, but he's not going to stay dead. And the whole purpose in this is so that the Son of God might be glorified. It tells us in verse 5 that Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. Now, verse 6 is really an interesting one. Again, lots of rabbit trails, but we'll just pass by. When he heard, therefore, that he was sick, knowing full well that Lazarus was going to die, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. That comes up a little bit later here. After that, after the 2 days, saith he to his disciples, let us go into Judea again. And the disciples say, Master, wait just a minute here. You are on all the wanted posters. Look what it says. The Jews of late sought to stone thee. Are you sure you want to go there again? And Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. Keep in mind, this is the same Jesus who says, I am the light of the world. And then verse 11, these things said he, and after that he saith unto them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth. This sickness is not unto death. And the disciples say, hey, if he's sleeping, that's a good thing. So then in verse 14, Jesus says unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. The disciples spend all this time with Jesus, and we've seen this in other times, that he says something, and they don't grasp what he's saying. Perspective. And so he tells them very clearly, no misunderstanding. It's hard to misunderstand the bluntness here. Lazarus is dead. But look at verse 15. I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there. Wait a minute. Now look back. What was his purpose in this? He's already told us in verse 4, the sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified. Who does he want to see what he's going to do? Well, the disciples are within that group. Then Thomas, Didymus, often referred to as Doubting Thomas, said unto his fellow disciples, let us go also that we may die with him. I'm sure the other disciples were like, yeah, Thomas, you go first, please. I mean, it doesn't matter. Thomas, sometimes, like in this instance, Peter and other, there are times that the disciples, they make statements as you read them, you're like, did I read that right? You ever been reading in the Bible and you look back to see if you maybe missed a word that changed the meaning? And you look and say, what is he volunteering for here? Verse 17, Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Okay, so what do we see here? Jesus received the message that Lazarus was dying. They stayed 2 days, and they get here to Bethany, and Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. So there's some information that we can glean from this. Anyway, let's run through the notes on this first one, and we'll pick back up with the passage here. First of all, he's got three friends. The three friends are siblings. Mary's the one that's the most familiar to us. But Mary and Martha, the two sisters. And then Lazarus. Lazarus doesn't make a lot of appearances within the Gospels, but when he does, like in this, he's got a large passage devoted to him because of all that takes place here. The sisters send a message to Jesus, hey, Lazarus is dying. Well, Lazarus is dead. And it's interesting what it says here. Look at verse 3. Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. Interesting way to put that. But they knew that Jesus Christ was not simply someone that was, well, it's somebody that we met once as we were walking. There was a close friendship here. There was a dearness. We've mentioned this a couple of times, so we'll just put the note up. Lazarus died so that the Father and the Son might be glorified. There was a reason for it, and it was a reason that the people on the ground weren't able to see. They weren't aware of it. All they see is the death and suffering. We mentioned this. This was at the verse 6. They get the message, and Jesus stays where he is for a couple days. Why? Well, the why is the previous note, so that the Father could be glorified. And then Jesus says, okay, it's time to go to Bethany, and the disciples are like, no, please, are you sure about that? Can we sit and discuss this for a moment? And his response was what? Well, yeah, this is where we're going to go. And he gives kind of a riddle there in verses 9 and 10 about walking in the light, not in the darkness. You don't want to stumble. You want to see where you're going. We're not going to sneak in. We're going to go where we need to go. And then he says that Lazarus is asleep. The disciples are like, what do we mean by that? And if he's sleeping, that's good. And he says, no, that's not the sleeping I meant. He's dead. And we just mentioned this, Jerusalem to Bethany, it's about 2 days travel. If you stayed for 2 days and gets there, and Lazarus is been dead for 4. And that was it wasn't that it was that terribly far. And it wasn't that they couldn't have made it sooner. We saw already, it's not as if, hey, Lazarus is dying, Lazarus is dead, all right, let's go, we got to get there right now. And so even as he's going, it's not as if he's making a beeline running right there. Because he knows all that's taking place. He knows the purpose. He knows the reason. So there's our map. I don't expect you to be able to read it. Just look at the arrow in the middle. And then you see I've got 2 of the names highlighted. They're not real bright. Obviously, I'm looking back here, much brighter than what you have here. But hopefully you can see where the highlight is. That's Jerusalem and Bethany. No, they're not coming from Jerusalem, but that shows you kind of its reference point, where they are. This area of Judea, it's about the location. And they're walking a couple days from where they are to get here. If we wanted to go back and march up, we'll find exactly where they're beginning. So he's dead. He's dead for 4 days. He's been, there's no question. It's not like, well, is he really dead? We'll hear sometimes as we talk and study the crucifixion of Christ, there'll be people who say, well, it wasn't that he was really resurrected, it's that he wasn't quite dead, in the coolness of the tomb awakened him. And he was awakened enough, he was really, really beat up and sore, but he was able to stagger. And no, he's been dead for 4 days. There's no question about that. And so let's move down to verse 19. And many of the Jews came to Martha and to Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Now look at the faith right there. If you'd been here, he'd still be alive. Now, look at verse 22. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. She has faith that Jesus could have kept him from dying, and she has faith that Jesus can do whatever he wills. When we continue on, we're not quite sure that she fully believes. Because look at the next statement. Jesus says, thy brother shall live again. And Martha's like, well, I know that he'll live in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus, you can do whatever you will, whatever the Father allows. Jesus, he's going to live again. I know in the last days. Could she not have said, is it possible that he could live again today? I mean, you just, again, as I read through it, there's so much that we could dive into, so many different rabbit trails that we could run down. I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection. Look at Jesus now in verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet he shall live. Now, he's talking spiritually, knowing full well what's going to be happening physically in just mere moments. Now look at verse 27. Again, usually when we think of Martha, she gets a bad rap. Usually when we think of Martha, she's the one that's busy scurrying around the house, just frustrated because nobody else is helping, right? But look at the faith that this woman has. Look at verse 27. She said unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. I mean, this woman here has incredible faith in Jesus Christ. And so we've got her talking about Lazarus in his present condition and in Jesus as the one who gives life and is the very Son of God. Now, Jesus' reply, I am the resurrection and the life, and that thy brother shall live again, his two-part reply here is misunderstood. Hey, your brother's going to live again. Well, I know he'll rise at the resurrection in the last day. Now, we don't have any indication that this happened. But do you think maybe, though not on his face, in the back of his mind and in his heart, Jesus is smiling at that point? Saying, oh, Martha, if only you knew. Again, he knows what is about to happen. Martha had, first of all, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And that's his exact words. I am the resurrection. I am the life. Keep your finger here. We'll come right back. We'll look at one verse that's very, very familiar to you. Look over to John 14:6. Verse very familiar. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I mean, he's very plain, very clear in what he has to say. And here we are now in John chapter 11. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. In your minds, I'm not going to click back, in your minds go back to the introductory notes slide at the bottom. Death is the result of sin. God didn't plan for death. He didn't want for death, but man sinned. Here we find him saying, I'm the resurrection of life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet, what do we call that? Jesus refers to it this way in John chapter 3 when he's talking to Nicodemus. A man must be born again. He must get a new life. And so here, without using that terminology, he's referencing that same concept. Martha has faith. We see this here in verse 27. She has faith that Jesus is indeed the Christ. Similar to, maybe 3 weeks ago, we saw Peter's great confession. Who do men say that I am? Well, maybe Elijah, or maybe John the Baptist, or that prophet. Well, who do you say that I am? Well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Peter's great confession, look at Martha now. Thou art the Christ, the Son of God. I mean, this is someone we saw in the beginning of the account here, close friends, dear friends of Jesus Christ, Lazarus, he whom thou lovest. But they were good students also. They listened, they learned. Oh, they did not know everything. Their perspective was different than ours, and they did not have the completed scriptures that they could go home and study. But they listened, they learned, and they had great faith. And she knows who she's talking to. She still doesn't fully understand all that can happen and does not yet know what's about to happen. But she knows that she's talking to the very Son of God. And Jesus, as he talks here, those who believe in Jesus, they may die, but they have everlasting life. Now, they're not going to die and live again quite like Lazarus. Lazarus is one of those anomalies within human history. We mentioned already the verse, it is appointed unto man once to die. unless your name's Lazarus, in which case you die twice. And there are a couple of other instances where we have like that. How about Elijah? It is appointed unto Elijah no times to die. And so there are a couple of instances in the entirety of human history where it is appointed unto men once to die doesn't quite apply. Lazarus is one of those where it's not once but twice. All for the purpose that God might be glorified. Verse 27 again, Martha saith unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary her sister secretly, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. And as soon as she heard that, talking about Mary now, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus was not yet come unto the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. The Jews then, which were with her in the house and comforted her, when they saw Mary, that she arose hastily and went out, they followed her, saying, She goeth to the grave to weep there. So the Jews that were there mourning, they see, Mary gets the message, Jesus is near and he's calling for you. She quickly rises and goes. Now, again, think of what's going on here. It's a funeral, it's a time of mourning. And all of a sudden, those deep in grief are making hasty movements. They're going somewhere. Well, their assumption, and not incorrectly, their assumption, she's going to the grave to weep. She's just overcome with grief. Verse 32, Mary was come where Jesus was. She sees him. She fell down at his feet, saying, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Well, that sounds familiar. What was 21? Martha says unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Lazarus was dying, what did the sisters do? They sent a message to Jesus. Do you think maybe since Lazarus has died, that they've been saying, man, if only Jesus had been here. If only Jesus had been here. And yet, Jesus got there right when he intended to. He was right on time. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in spirit and was troubled. Now, I want to take a moment and stop right here and hit the next couple notes here. I already referenced this note, Mary, hey, you should have been here. Jesus groans in his spirit and is greatly troubled. And in reading and studying and preparing and getting the notes and everything all put together, Answers in Genesis makes a point to look at the word itself, that he groaned in his spirit. And it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to not read a lot because it's not a long explanation, but I do want to make sure I don't confuse what they were saying here. Okay, I'm just going to read. It's only like 2 sentences here. The Greek word used here literally means to snort like a horse. So they're saying that the groaning is implying anger and indignation. Okay, that's interesting. It means that Jesus wasn't so much sad at the scene surrounding the tomb of Lazarus as he was angry. Well, why would he be angry? Jesus was angry and troubled at the ravages of the great enemy of man, death. Death is an intruder, and Jesus wouldn't settle for this domination of death much longer. Now, that's their explanation. Now, if the word indeed is that he was snorting like a horse and that he was angry, as I stopped to think about that, I'm like, I could see that. If we wanted to go all the way back to the introductory slides, when God created Adam and Eve, death was not the plan, although God knew that death was the outcome, because God knew that man would sin. But it wasn't the plan. And in this case, he's had both sisters come to him, and the very first words out of their mouth were, if only you had been here. And if we wanted to go over and look at 1 Corinthians 15, we find Paul writing, talking about the fact that Jesus is going to conquer death and the grave. And he talks about the fact that there's no sting or victory there because Christ has the victory over death and the grave. And then you see how death is affecting all these people, especially these three. Lazarus is dead. Mary and Martha, who are grieving for their brother who has died. And you have the one who has declared himself to be the resurrection and the life. I can see where that's coming from then. It's not the first thought that would have come to mind, because as I read it in English, I understand it in English, and I understand it the way we use the English today. So again, it's one of those, I don't want to dive off and go running down this rabbit trail. We've got about 10 minutes left, and it's going to be pushed to get done now. But there's one of those, like I said, we see the sign as we go by. Hey, one of these days I want to take a moment and go down this exit and see what's here. And this is one that I might, sometime this week, take a moment and dive into this one a little bit. But I can see very, very easily why he was angry. And angry at death when we think that Jesus is the one who offers life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by the way, the truth, and the life. And he is the one that gives life, not simply physical life, but more than that, he gives spiritual life. Then we come here to that short verse that all those kids in Bible class in Christian school, when they're told, hey, we need you to recite a verse for us. This is the one that can always remember. Jesus wept. Well, if he's groaning and snorting like a horse because he's angry, then why is he weeping? Well, he's weeping for Lazarus, but is he weeping for Lazarus? Is he weeping because he's seeing the effects of sin and death? And you see all these people who are milling around having no hope. It's an interesting question. Again, always I read, and in my mind, Jesus wept. He's weeping because Lazarus has died. But I've got to stop and think, Jesus is omniscient. Lazarus is dead, but he's not going to be for much longer. So is Jesus, why would Jesus weep? Why wouldn't he be ecstatic and full of joy, knowing what's about to happen? Again, just something to ponder. The next statement I have here, I have a typo. I didn't catch it earlier. You'll see it pretty quickly if you read the note here. But look at verse 37. And some of them, looking back up to verse 36, them is the Jews, okay? And some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind cause even this man should not have died? Okay, it's not that Jesus wondered why Jesus, it's the Jews wondered why Jesus. The Jews were wondering, couldn't this man, interesting. Mary and Martha, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. The Jews, man, if this man had been here, maybe he wouldn't have died. Now, did all of those within the mass of people right here believe in Jesus Christ, that he was the Son of God? I'm going to guess no. But had they seen him do incredible miracles? I mean, look what it says. Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused this man to not have died? Verse 38, Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. In verse 39, take away the stone. And Martha has a concern here. Lord, there's a good chance that he smells. Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. Are you sure you want to do that? And Jesus said I not unto thee that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldst see. What was the reason for all of this back in the beginning of the chapter? thou shouldst see the glory of God. And so Martha's concerned about the odor. Jesus is concerned about God being glorified. He restates the purpose in this. He prays, not a long prayer. Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by thee I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And so he has the stone rolled away. He prays to the Father. He issues the command, Lazarus, come forth. And as he comes forth, what was the initial response of the people? It doesn't tell us. It gives us a secondary response. But there had to be a response before verse 35. Either shock, disbelief, jaw drops to the ground. Lazarus, come forth, and out comes Lazarus, who's still all bound up in his grave clothes. Out comes Lazarus. He's been dead and we're concerned about him stinking, and here he comes walking out of the grave. The next response that we see here, some believed, then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. Verse 46, but not everybody. Some of them went their ways, and look where they went. They went to the Pharisees. You'll never believe what he did. I mean, you have what we could describe as the greatest miracle in the history of mankind, the raising of the dead, before a multitude of witnesses. And you have people who are like, I can't believe that he did this. It causes me to shake my head and say, what was wrong with these people? Well, they were driven by hatred. So in verse 47, chief priests and Pharisees, they meet together and say, what are we going to do? This man doeth many miracles. Their concern wasn't the miracles. Their concern was, verse 45, many of those which had seen these things which Jesus did believed on him. That was their concern. And so they start to develop a plan. And again, just for time, don't have time to read all the way through, but look at verse 53. Then from that day forth, they took counsel together for to put him to death. Jesus doesn't walk openly amongst the Jews anymore. Passover is nigh. Verse 56, they seek for Jesus. Verse 57, the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he was, that he should show it, that they might take him. So they have gone from being irritated, aggravated, and upset and angry with him to now outright hatred, making plans to kill him. Why? Because he raised the dead. But in doing so, he showed that their system wasn't getting them to God. Run quickly through application. First one is answers may vary. As we've discussed the passages today, we looked at this. What has been most helpful to you? How in the world would I know? Okay, I can't answer that. Depends on where you focus on, what you see as we run through this. How can we use the account of Lazarus to help someone understand that Jesus was not just a man, but God in the flesh? We could start by running to Martha's statement. Hey, I believe that you are the Son of God. You're the Creator. He demonstrates power over death. Not giving medicine and treatment to keep someone from dying, but to make somebody alive after they've died. That's pretty powerful. He claimed to be one with the Father. And all that he did was to glorify the Father. And he showed power over creation and demonstrated his deity in all of this. And again, just for time, I just have to move quickly through this. How does understanding our spiritual condition before we found salvation in Christ help us to offer God the worship he is due? We have to understand before salvation, we are dead in our sins. I have here enslaved. And we're enslaved by death. And salvation is a miracle. It's a miracle even greater than raising the dead. And the miracle of salvation, the new life that we gain in him, should cause us to praise him. I mean, stop and think for a moment. As challenging as life can be some days, if we have Christ as our Savior, those challenges really aren't that much at all. Now, it's easy to say on the good day, but what about the bad days? We have to understand that salvation allows us to see that we have victory over sin and death. How does the world being that spiritual world, the enemy of God, how does the world seek to quiet or cover up a witness that a Christian has regarding their resurrection from spiritual death? That's one of those, again, answers may vary kind of thing. First, we need to be a light in a dark world, but the world wants to keep our light dark. And so often, this is where we get to the answer, often our good deeds are going to be evil spoken of, using a Bible terminology here. Often our good is evil spoken of, or ignored, or shouted down, or pushed to the background. And we have to understand that we're not doing good, we're not doing right to please the people around us, we're doing what's right to glorify God. Many people claim that seeing a miracle would convince them that God exists. Think back, different Lazarus, but we have the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man dies. Oh, Father Abraham, would you send someone to tell my brothers? And what does Father Abraham say? No, they've got the prophets. They've got the message. Oh, but if someone would come back from the dead and tell them that, and here we have Jesus Christ raising the dead, and some of those that see the miracle happen. I'm tired of this already. And they go marching off to the Pharisees to make sure that somebody's going to have to deal with this. First of all, not all who see the miracle believe in Christ. And he was the source of the miracle. They didn't want to accept that. And it's important that we understand that Christ is more than a miracle worker. He is the very Son of God. We go back to Martha's statement, Peter's great confession. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus Christ was there in this instance at this exact time to see that God was glorified. And he makes mention in that the Son of Man is glorified. He says, I want people to see the Father glorified and to understand that I am one with him. Amazing statement. Great message here. The account of the raising of Lazarus. And there's so much here. We've skipped over so much because the clock only allows us so much time. But let me encourage you to take time and dive in and do some additional study on this. Father, we thank you so much for the day and for your goodness to us. Father, would you bless? Help us to take the lessons that we've learned, Father, to apply them to our lives. God, I pray that you would be glorified in this. Be with the service to come. Father, I pray you be with the pastor, give him the words to say. Help us to have hearts and minds that are open and attentive. Father, help us to not simply hear, but to listen intently. Father, listen intently so that we can put the principles into application within our lives. And we ask this in your name, amen.